"Then, if the ring cannot be kept from him forever by strength," said Glorfindel, "two things only remain for us to attempt. To send it over the sea, or destroy it." From this quote, our theory begins. The council sat in silence, thinking about the paths that Glorfindel set before them. Boromir shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It is folly to destroy it," Boromir exclaimed. "Not with a full army could we undo the strength of Sauron." "So it seems," Gandalf answered. "There is but one choice. We must indeed send the One Ring over the seas, and hope beyond hope that the Valar receive it with our plea for aid." As in the original timeline, Elrond believed that the Valar would not take the One Ring, as it came from Middle-earth. He said as much to the council now. "Neither is Sauron," Glorfindel remarked. "We bear the ill will of the Maya, this second Dark Lord, though he is not of the children of Iluvatar or the Free Peoples." "Indeed," Galdor remarked, "it is a slight chance, but one that we must take. Through the fact that Sauron is a Maya, it is only just that the Valar aid us in some way to defeat him. He is not an enemy that we should have to face." Elrond conceded. "If it is the will of this council, we shall send the ring west over the seas, for the Valar to decide its fate. If they deny it, the ring shall find its way to the bottom of the waters, which shall rid us of its presence for a time." Gandalf shook his head. "What then?" the wizard said. "What then shall come of the ring if it resurfaces in the years or the ages to come?" "If indeed it does," Aragorn said, "we have until that time to capture Sauron himself, and send him over the seas as well. Whether the Valar do or do not take the ring, they will have to accept Sauron. If it resurfaces, the ring may then be hidden," Boromir added, "in the vaults of Minas Tirith, never to be used by any. By that time, the Dark Lord will already be far away. Once he is gone, the One Ring should be of little value altogether." Finally, the council came to some sort of agreement. They would send the One Ring west with an elven emissary, alike to Eärendil with the Silmaril, and plea for aid from the Valar. If the gods indeed rejected the One Ring, this elf would have to face the seas, if that is what Ulmo judges right. The elf to take on this perilous quest would be Glorfindel, as he had returned from Valinor earlier in the age, and the gods knew of his virtue. While this happened, all of the Free Peoples united behind their commanders, and fortified their positions. The Free Peoples of Middle-earth knew that if they defeated Sauron in battle, that he would not stay gone for long. The only way to permanently rid Middle-earth of this dark presence was to send him over the seas to the Valar. And so, the men of Middle-earth were to follow their kings, while Celeborn and Thranduil led the elves, and Dane Ironfoot united all dwarves. Such military might and unity had not yet been seen in the Third Age. Even the Shire folk would stand with Frodo and his companions, once they were convinced of the evil that was approaching their lands. After the great mustering of the Free Peoples, it was hoped that the forces of Mordor would be stunned enough for the hosts of the West to capture Sauron and bring him to the harbors in Gondor, so that he may return to Valinor to be judged by the Valar for all of his crimes throughout the ages. Thus, after the Council of Elrond, the militaries of the Free Peoples were rallied far more effectively than in the original canon, but we shall come to answer the question: does such military prowess overcome the need to destroy the One Ring, as we get in the original story? Near the end of the autumn of 3018 in the Third Age, the hosts of Elrond and the Dunedain Rangers of Eriador journeyed with Gandalf, Aragorn, Boromir, Legolas, and Gimli southward, towards Isengard. Elrond stayed behind to coordinate the efforts of all leaders. He sent elven messengers to every corner of the land, telling each faction of the evils that lay beyond their borders, convincing them to join the cause. In the original timeline, Saruman has ample time to consolidate a force against Rohan, resulting in the Battle of Helm's Deep. This time, however, the elves and the rangers, led by Gandalf and Aragorn, would stop him well before having enough forces to take on Rohan. And so, in December of 3018, their armies surrounded Isengard, leaving enough time to siege the ring surrounding Orthanc and cut it off from the outside resources of the Fangorn Forest. Inevitably, Saruman would be forced to surrender in order to spare his life, and so he was sent as a captive to Rivendell, to be held until he too could be transported to Valinor, to face judgment for his many treacherous deeds. While the siege of Isengard happened, most all free folk had prepared themselves for war, and placed defenses on their homes before sending some armies to Minas Tirith to fight the oncoming darkness of Sauron. Indeed, without the trouble of the One Ring, each faction of the Free Peoples could easily muster a force and prepare themselves for the enemies to come. In this timeline, battles like the Scurrying of the Shire or the Battle of Dale would never take place, because the Free Peoples were too informed and well defended. Now, continuing with our story, the men of Aragorn's army came to Edoras, allowing Gandalf and the Eldar to awaken Theoden King to Saruman's treachery. The kingdom of Rohan would unite, and the host of the West would march to Minas Tirith. As these forces moved, the great company of rangers from the north reminded Aragorn of the paths of the dead. They then journeyed to Dunharrow with their chieftain, to call the men of the mountain to fulfill their oaths at last, before coming into the Bay of Balfalas as he does in the original story. On his journey, Aragorn encountered many men of Gondor that he rallied to his cause. He then remembered well the threat of the Corsairs from his earlier days. So, Aragorn and his army took a detour to rid Sauron of one of his allies, and they burned the fleet at Umbar, before the Corsairs could strike at the citizens of Gondor. After this quick skirmish with the Corsairs, Aragorn decided it would be best to release the Oathbreakers, as they had indeed fulfilled their oath to help Gondor in their time of need. Making his way back to Minas Tirith, Aragorn's army would encounter the Elves of Rovanion, the Dwarves of Erebor, and the Men of Dale as well, outside of the gates of Minas Tirith. From here, the Free Peoples would repair and fortify Minas Tirith and the Ramos Ekhor, the wall outside Minas Tirith, for the coming onslaught of Sauron's forces. With such defenses in place, the Free Peoples were ready for whatever Sauron could throw at them. During the Battle of Pelennor Fields, many heroes of the West earned names and titles. Most men fought inside the walls of Minas Tirith, while the riders of Rohan fought the infantry outside the walls, while the elves brought down the mummics of the south, and the dwarves destroyed the siege weapons of the enemy. Within a day, the battle was over, and it was an astonishing victory for the Free Peoples of Middle-earth. After this well-fought battle with Sauron's armies, Aragorn became King Elisar and took Arwen as his queen, in spite of Denethor's rule as steward, who retired when Boromir took his place. Gondor was once again united under its new king, queen, and steward. All was well in the free lands of Middle-earth, but how long would this last? All matters of battle and war went very well for the Free Peoples, alike to the combined strength of Númenor and the elves in the Second Age, but I think these victories only go so far. After winning their first battle on the home front of Minas Tirith, Gondor's allies in the Hobbits would come to their aid, just as the Hobbits had helped Arnor stand against Angmar many years before. The elves would also awaken the Ents once again to stand against Mordor. With their combined strength, men, elves, dwarves, hobbits, and Ents alike marched to the Black Gate to finish Mordor's armies and capture Sauron finally. The forces of the Free Peoples would look like 30,000 fighters strong at least, not to mention Gwaihir and his eagles who would aid Gandalf the Grey in a final battle. Sauron was prepared, however. His forces were virtually unknown in number. After the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, roughly a month before, Sauron pulled back all of his armies, even those sent to attack Erebor in the north, and the Dark Lord consolidated his power behind the Mountains of Shadow. When the Free Peoples rallied themselves in front of the Black Gate, they quickly realized they were vastly outnumbered, even as they were in the original story. Their arrogance and number had squandered their strategy, and the Free Peoples were forced to retreat westward, as Sauron had many more armies following behind them from Minas Morgul. In this battle, Gwaihir and his eagles were lost to the poison arrows of the orcs and the fell beasts of the Nazgul. The Ents were burned, as they were not quick enough to escape the encounter, and thousands of elves, men, dwarves, and hobbits were defeated or taken as prisoners. Though the Free Peoples had the defensive advantage, and would continue to have it for many years to come, their numbers would forever dwindle against Sauron's near-limitless armies of orcs and Uruk-hai. Rather than beginning a Fourth Age after 3021 of the Third Age, the Third Age would continue in decades of war. Fathers would pass the battle against Sauron to their sons, and so forth. After much time and conflict, the elves would lose their chances to diminish into the west as the war continued, and Sauron won more and more of the skirmishes. A red sun was setting in the west. The year was 3121 of the Third Age. An old grey wanderer looked off into the distance towards his homeland in Valinor. "I'm sorry, Manwë and Varda. I told you once that I was too weak to combat Sauron, and I'm afraid I was right." The old wizard looked wearily at the water, washing the shore near his feet. "I suppose the Dark Lord should be here any moment now, and he shall put an end to the last rebel of his will." Gandalf observed a gold ring wash ashore, and that nearly broke his hope. Sauron's ring had found its way back to Middle-earth. The Valar had indeed rejected this relic. At that exact moment, Gandalf heard the marching of orcs behind him. They had come, here, to the Grey Havens. They would find Sauron's ring, and all would be lost. However, before giving in to despair, Gandalf heard an angelic horn cry out in the distance. He looked to the seas, to see many ships carrying the emblem of Manwë coming out of the setting sun. The wizard heard his master's voice in his head. "We may have rejected the ring, but we did not reject Saruman. After 100 years of imprisonment, he has revealed the evils that he and Sauron have committed. Now, the strength of Iluvatar's children is all but spent, and so, we shall rid this Middle-earth of the Dark Lord, and begin the second music of the Ainur to renew this world. Eru Iluvatar deems that it is time to do so." In his final moments, Gandalf felt the joy of 1,000 hobbits during second breakfast, and saw a vision of the world being renewed. Sauron could have his One Ring, but his power would not last forever. Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I'd like to thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I know these theories usually end in a grim way, but I think the story we got in The Lord of the Rings was really the only way that victory could truly be achieved for the Free Peoples, as most other possibilities would usually end in tragedy. Without the destruction of the One Ring, I believe that only the Valar could hope to defeat Sauron, but what do you all think? I personally believe that Tolkien's Legendarium is an anti-war story, and it's more about the small hopes of victory that count. Like two small hobbits changing the course of history. Such is the lesson that we must always remember in any endeavor. There are always risks, but there is always hope in those chances. So what do you all think? What if the One Ring hadn't been a part of the War of the Ring? What do you all imagine would have happened? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it with someone who you think may enjoy it. If you'd like to contact me more directly, please join us on Facebook and Twitter through the links in the description below, and subscribe to join the Men of the West and all free folk today. I would like to thank you all for your support throughout this year and the years to come. As I wrote the script for today's video on December 29th, I remembered that day was also the 3-year anniversary for this channel. However, this is really the year that the channel grew, and for that reason and so many others, I thank you all. Happy New Year's, everyone. I hope 2018 is an even greater year for you guys than 2017 was. And I will see you all later this week with a remake of an earlier video of mine. As always, thank you all for joining me on this adventure and so many others. Until the next ones, my friends.